Hi, welcome to this video on the res equation. This is going to be a detailed video and I will make mistakes, that's for sure. I may get some names wrong and it's quite possible I'll get the year wrong from time to time. That's just me reading things and not reading it correctly. That's not a case of errors or that I am generally a little bit dim. Let's start with a quick refresh of some of the previous spreadsheets that are a part of this GDP game playing to win scenario. The M system supercoupling, and here we basically take the notion that the smallest consistent of string theory is paradoxically not at odds with the statement that it may also be the whole universe, and we've looked at that in a different way and changed that to the notion that this is the smallest constituent is paradoxically not at odds with the statement that this may be the entire economy or the whole economy. And two simple rules: a Villa Secrets company in year 3 reproduces to make it 2 new companies, and each of those 2 companies follow suit. By 2075, those 2 companies, that one company, well, it's taken over the global economy. Obviously, it's not as simple as that, but that's what we got the other spreadsheets for. This is just a little introduction. Okay, significant spreadsheet here, S-World bonds and tenders, which shows us from an initial investment of, say, 10.7 million. In fact, I don't even need to go down. Later on that year, the investment will be worth 35 million. Plus, this company receives enough tenders to make all the profit that it is showing without it having to make a single sale outside of the network. Of course, it will sell outside of the network, but we're just showing that it doesn't need to. Okay. How many companies? Well, in playing to win, by 2034, or was it 2032? 2032, I think. Anyway, it's nearly 500,000 companies, over nearly 2 million personnel, 7 million family members of that personnel taken care of, 7 million people who used to probably be farmers, but now the combine harvesters are here. They don't have jobs. They're in full-time education or can play professional sport. Okay, that's over half of what Malawi will be come 2032, unless they have an extreme explosion spike. So that's a very good result. Okay, now let's get into it. How on earth do we get to make that? It's financial equivalence, and it's the GDP game in general, and it's the res equation. All the same thing, highly complex, but at heart simple set of rules that have been mimicked and simulated from various rules in theoretical physics and some rules from economics. Right, so revenue, efficiency, spin. That's revenue, the initial revenue you have there and there. This is investment, times the efficiency of the spending, and we see that here, i.e. 90% of this supplier goes to other suppliers that are a part of the S-World network. And those suppliers buy 90% of their supplies from, yeah, you guessed it, another company in the S-World network. This is not too dissimilar to the way SpaceX have organized themselves. They have a 90% E, but it's within one company. This is exactly the same thing, but it's in all industries, not specifically rocket science. And it's okay, there's one of those points where I've forgotten what I was going to say. This is going to happen from now and again. If I open up and admit it straight away, I think we'll get through this thing. Okay, so anyway, that is the E. And if you change one on the spreadsheet, it changes everything. Okay, now part of E is tax. And here you can see we don't have 95% tax, we have 5% tax. It's 95% because it's at that times 90% equals that, and then that's added to the next year. But it's 5%. Why is it 5% tax? Well, it started out as something called the Trump equation that I thought of during his debates, the first debate, I believe. And he was saying how these companies can't come back into the USA because they'll be taxed, and how he wants to lower tax. I've always thought business tax is a complete waste of time because it just inhibits the payroll tax and VAT, which would make a lot more money. However, I can understand why other people don't understand the math and therefore they believe higher taxes on companies are better. My principle was, well, why not see what good that company does, either philanthropically or ecologically, or in terms of paying salaries and VAT. And if the company's making an absolute fortune for the government coffers out of VAT and out of payroll, cut that tax for that person. Cut that tax down for that company, sorry. Cut that tax down. Tax should be related to the good a company does. And in this case, we're talking the good not only in terms of tax receipts. In fact, specifically, we're not talking in terms of tax receipts. We're talking in terms of the good things that are done for the people. And this is for Malawi, this particular presentation. So things that are done for the good of the people in Malawi. And in this scenario, because this is a philanthropic model, and it has been since 2011, following the Bill and Melinda Gates idea, 80% of everything that gets made or produced eventually is in some way or another for the good of the people. Therefore, we should be taxed only on that 20%, and that's where that 5% comes from. That can also go up to 10%, with 5% being paid in network credits under the terms that it must be spent within a spin cycle. Okay, so that is the E. Now let's look at this spin. Spin naturally occurs in all economies. It's where one person spends some money, maybe in a shop, and then that shop spends that money on something else, and that something else spends it on something else. However, due to generally no companies work with a high E, they don't try to, and there's tax, which is normally 25% or something. So you can't make much of a benefit out of the res equation if you've got high tax and you don't pay concentration to E. The res equation is all about low tax and high E. Okay, now the spin. So we have the initial amount minus 10%, minus 5%, turns into this amount for spin 2, and the same thing happens. Spin 3, and you can see this middle one's a good indicator. You can see it's going down from 9 million to 8 to just over 7. Okay, there we go. Spin 6, spin 7, spin 8, and here we come to the conclusion. We add it all up, and what we see is, compared to the tender amount that was being spent after the 9 spins, cash flow was created 514% more than that initial investment, this investment here. And because of that, the GDP for that spending will be 514% higher than the initial spending, which is 23 billion. Okay. Now, factor that Malawi is currently only making 5.5 billion, and by this point, 2024, won't be making above 7 unless something dramatically changes. And one has the largest gain in financial history. The largest gain previously in GDP is Japan between 1965 and 1970 in their manufacturing and mining sectors of 17%. We're talking here of a 43% increase. And that point is, that's why it's called the GDP game, because we know how to do this. If we have that investment, and we get the right The people are very important. Another reason why I'm picking Malawi, because those guys they really know how to work, and they're really nice nice people. Um, so yeah, because one has achieved this in 2024 because of the spin and because of the high E. Every investment company in the world is going to want to get into it, and from 2025 one can basically write a blank check in terms of investment, and one can deploy this same strategy in another 61 different locations of abject poverty before 2032. That might be a little bit over optimistic, but you know, this is an optimistic view of this game. That's why it's the playing to win. Normally, I'm very cautious about things. In this game, it's let's do it. Okay, what else do we need to look at? Here is the beginning of the ingredients for financial equivalence. This is basically the 9th spin. In fact, let's just, yeah. But because that spin happens, sorry, the previous spins have been looked at as 6-week spins. Each spin is 6 weeks, so that over 8 spins, it's exactly a year. The 9th spin would basically bring that income back to the beginning of the next year. This is the income made from companies. This is the income made from making companies specifically for property. And that's what's known, that's the financial equivalence. When res equals 100, that figure will be equal to the input, and each year one will only ever increase in its yield. Okay, I'm just gonna take a look at the notes here. What have we discussed? Res, yeah. Just gonna very quickly run back to here. Brief explanation. Half of the investment, well, actually half of the investment that we have assigned to res spending is on making companies who are building residential and commercial property. The other half is for companies that are creating other things. And inside of that, we have parts, an investment, and a personnel cost. Okay, I'm not going to get too into it because you can see it on the spreadsheet. It's, you know, it's fairly simple. Okay, let's go down now. Okay, so we can see again, this is the amount needed for a tender company to pay for its tenders. That basically means it's got an order of $18 million, and because of the 5 spins in general, sorry, because of the 8 spins in general all around, that's increased by 514%. Here we notice that the actual investment is more, and there's this non-res investment. What that is, it's a sort of cheating. It basically lowers the E. It's basically money that you know, if you want to buy land from somebody, you can't buy land from somebody who's already in the network, unless that's, you know, most land available to buy will not be from someone in the network. Put it that way, and that's what that'll be spent on, and assets, etc., etc., etc. So there's a bit of a buffer. And you'll see this becomes very important when we come to an E of 100, because it enables an E of 100. Without this little buffer, an E of 100 is almost impossible. Anyway, let's carry on. We go down. Okay, here's the money for all the tenders. Tenders are very important because it makes the case for this year's success. And here we can see this number here. This changes the amount of companies throughout. So if I were to go 256, changes it all over the place. Okay, this is cash flow after tenders. This is a 911 internet system that will sort of inspired by Mark Zuckerberg. Here's another for spending. After all that, there's this amount left, 16 billion, and that leaves 4 billion for some government network credits. And after all this, we can see in terms of government, they would be due for a 2 billion tax yield. Here we're talking a 7.6, so it's a significantly larger amount in tax. And here we can see where all that comes from. Here's the detail. The bulk of it comes from that plus network credits. There. The more the network makes, the more the government gets. So it's, you know, it's not only a fair system to say we want 5% tax because 80% of what we're doing is for the people. It also makes an awful lot of sense for the government because that makes us all this money so we can give it back to the government and la-di-da, as long as they spend it within 6 weeks on one or another S-World company or property. Right, okay, let's get to the other few points here. Here's how we work out the Malawi GDP. It's just times by 3% for 3% growth. If we come up here, this is the world record, Japan versus Malawi info. Here is our target. At the moment, the target being 1% of GDP. As we can see, the GDP here, this is the World Bank in 2016, inflated by 3% each year. And we can see the totals needed. And this total here would be, sorry, that's the total there. That would be 2024. Yeah, there it is. And this is 1% of it. So the target is to have 1% of global GDP, and we're seeing that the GDP rises each year. And you can see at the moment, miles and miles and miles away from it, even with that that significant boost. Here is the investment, and here is it with 12.5% compound interest. And that's what needs to be paid back. Right, okay, so that is the first spreadsheet. We're going to quickly have a look at this revenue from bonds. There's two things we're not going to get into in this video. One is this section, revenue not from bonds. This needs a whole nother book to it. And the investment, we're not going to talk about that either. We're just going to presume we get these amounts, and we're looking at what we can do if we get these amounts. And you can see what we can do is so much larger than these amounts that it's a sort of chicken and the egg. Once that chicken is, you can see it, those eggs, they're easily laid. Right. Okay, so we're moving to 2025, Res Year 2, and here I've just put no investment in. I've taken all the investment out and replaced it with these two local and international revenues. And part of the reason for that is to show that we do increase, i.e. here it is 29 versus 23 without investment. And that's important because there's a film, quite a lot of people talking about a potential fiat currency crash in the future because the Federal Reserve is no longer gold standard. And the worry is it's like a Ponzi scheme, whereas people are no longer willing to put more money in, it'll crash. Here, I've basically done that. I've said, look, no one's willing to put more money in terms of investment. It hasn't crashed. It's actually made, it's increased. Okay, so that's the point here. And in general, notice that I've gone to the discipline of in each one of these years only applying one positive change. Of course, one would apply all of the positive changes at the same time and look for new ones. But as a measure of caution and to simplify it, I've just used one positive change, i.e. the one positive change here being the local and international revenue. Note here the rollover revenue. This is financial equivalence. It's coming from here, or more to the point, it's coming from the previous year here, and that is basically for free at the beginning of next year. That's $1.1 billion roll over from the last year's spins, whereas in the 9th spin, that's how much it made. And this goes up and becomes, the phenomena of this series. Right. Okay, so let's move on to the next year, 2026. And I've introduced a bit more investment, not a lot. It's 2.7 billion. And in macroeconomic terms, that doesn't even count. You can't use that such a small amount when talking macroeconomics, unless you're talking about the microeconomics of how to get there, which is indeed what we're talking about. Note, though, so in a positive note, note that again, there's non-res investment. So there's investment that goes to this res system, and there's some investment that doesn't. Or that could be income that does and doesn't in the future. Right, and so what have we done? We've added that little bit of investment, and we've continued the local and international revenue. And remember, we're not talking about how these are made. Just got to accept that these figures are well within the margin of error, and we're looking at the financial equivalence. We're not worrying about how do we get that investment. We're not worrying about how do we make that money. We're presuming that money is there, and what happens to this tiny country of Malawi when we apply res and in fact the M systems and the GDP game in general. Okay, so we've added a little investment, and we can see we've gone up to 41 in cash flow created by the spinning of that initial R. And if we add Malawi's current GDP, or its projected GDP in 2026, it's up to 48 billion, nearly 10 times what it was in 2016. Okay, let's move on to another year. Okay, something's happened here. Whereas tax in... Okay, what I've done here, we've gone to the beginning of the spreadsheet again, and you see all this tax, this has now changed to 100%. That doesn't mean there's no tax being paid. What it means is there's still 5% being paid, but it's being paid definitively in network credits now. So let's see how that works for the government still. They still get their money, it's just they get it in network credits. See that? Yeah, government revenue is now nearly 10 billion. And the revenue it would probably have had without this system, 2.2. So, yeah, over 400% increase. And financially, we're looking at 49 billion cash flow created from the spins. And Malawi is a total of 57. Okay, let's go another year. We go for 10 years, by the way. I wanted to do it in 8 years, but I couldn't. Well, I probably could if I have to redo it again, but you know. What have we done this time? Okay, this time we've increased the res a bit. This was 50, it's now 75. Why is that so low? Because there's a lot of free stuff given away with the S-World farms and food and stuff, so it's lower. Yeah, so this has gone up from 90 to 95. This has gone up from 95 to 97. This wouldn't happen like this. This would eke up each year, but I've done it in stages. Of course, land and assets, again, when buying land and assets, 50% of that's probably now going to be from people in the network, and 50% is going to be people out of it. So one can only accrue that there. Okay, so let's follow it through and see what a difference it makes. Just have a look at that figure's building up nicely now. And we're up to 68 billion from 49. And total Malawi GDP 76. Okay, let's go another year. Okay, now look at that. 178 billion this year. Last year, it was 76. Over 100% increase in GDP in 1 year. What's happened? We've pushed up that E to get it nice and high. We've made tax in network credits, so tax doesn't detract from the spins, and we've changed it from spinning 8 times, which is on average 6 weeks, to 16 times, which is on average 3 weeks. That's what's happened. I'm going to take you to where that is, and it's basically all along here. You can see it here. This is now 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And now we start to see the beginning of financial equivalence as well. As this here, that's now bringing in 8 billion. That just gets added to the beginning of the following year's go, I suppose, for want of a better word. Okay, let's so we've seen that this is all due to that increasing of that spin from 8 to 16 has taken us from 718% increase in cash flow due to the spinning of the initial revenue to 1,204% increase of that initial revenue due to the spinning. Okay, now I think we're here. Yeah, financial equivalence. We are now at financial equivalence. What has happened? I've put res to 100. If we go here, here we have it. Res is at 100. So these figures never change. That company spends that on other S-World companies who pay 5% tax, but they're not. They're just giving away 5% of goods. They're making a sale to the government of 5% of whatever it is. So it just, the same figure stays there. It stays there. It stays there. It's just one company going to another company, because all the companies involved, it's a complete monopoly, and there's some antitrust rules that one has to look at. But the basics is these countries have got nothing. They've got no trade deals to worry about jeopardizing, and they're certainly not going to be saying, oh, well, actually, you know what, because of antitrust, we don't want to have all these billions. We don't want our people to have, what the Westerners have. I'm not going to start getting into being a preacher, but this is, so here we go. Financial equivalence is when the R at the beginning of the year, let's go all the way back to the beginning of the year, the R at the beginning of the year, that $18.459 billion turns into, and I'm going to go to the next year, $18.459 billion that you put as the beginning of the following year. That financial equivalence has made more money than the investment and all the income put together. See? And you see here, it's gone up because of the spinning to 32 billion the year after. And we can see that here. And you see it's doubling each year, basically. It's more than doubling. Where were we? Where were we? So, are there any things? Yep, here where we're in 2030. That was when RES went to 100. So that was financial equivalence. The following year, I have doubled the revenue. It would have been going up slowly or quickly since about 5 years ago when we had it last. It's just, as I mentioned, I'm only adding in one positive thing per year to make it simple, and so that I have lots of room. If I've done some hideous math here, and someone goes, "Hang on, that's not right by there," and you've only got half the amount of money you thought you had, I say, "Well, that's okay. I'm just going to spin it 24 and spin it earlier." Or I'll ask for more investment, or we'll try and make more revenue. There's plenty of room for this to be better. What one can't argue with is the financial equivalence. Okay, let's go to 2032, which is Angel City 3. A big pool of people all working towards making the best opportunities in 2032 happening. Hopefully in league with the Chan Zuckerberg Group Foundation, as they are looking for problems that can be solved over a 20-year period. Okay, so what has happened this year? We can see the amount of financial equivalence is 52. That's 52 billion from last year. Just gets rolled over as 52 as initial income from the next year. And again, the biggest income that's coming in is this rollover revenue. What have I done here in terms of an input? I've doubled the local revenue. Okay, target locks 2033. We're nearly there, and you can see we've moved to here. Okay, so we've got 1.2 trillion now. That adds to what Malawi would have made, which is 8 billion, 9 billion. It's horrifically low. But now it's a nice healthy 1.2 trillion. We're not quite at 1%. We're about 99.5% of that 1% of global GDP target. And currently we are 46.7 times higher increase than the best that's previously been recorded ever in terms of GDP. Okay, right, last one, 2034, RES, target achieved. We've now got a nice 1.4 trillion in GDP, and global GDP is 1.28. So we have in this scenario, this is now the winner. Let's just have a quick look at how the financial equivalence, that's 82 billion being rolled over. And let's have a quick look at government. Where is it? There it is. As opposed to having about 3 billion in money that you can use for tax, 370 billion. Okay, that's all for now, I think. See you in another video. Thanks.